Welcome, Kira. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Sally. Love being on.
So this is always like the most fun or challenging, depending on how you want to talk about it. I think group of essays to talk about for any school is University of Chicago schools. And full disclosure, I used to work there, and you live in the Chicago area and work with a lot of Chicago area students.
Very true.
So I think you and I both have quite a bit of experience with the Chicago essay types.
Very true. Yeah, I visited there when I worked at Brandeis. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So I do want to get to their quirky essay, which I think is the one that really drives my students the most crazy. But I
Mhm.
was thinking, why don't we talk quickly about the Why Chicago essay?
Of course.
I don't think it'll take us very long, but I think it'll be good to just sort of make sure we don't run out of time on the others.
Sure.
So that one is, how does the University of Chicago, as you know it now, satisfy your desire for a particular kind of learning, community, and future? And please address with some specificity your own wishes and how they relate to U Chicago. So how do you, I mean, it's a lot like a typical why this college essay, but I think there
Sure.
are some things to note. So what would you sort of highlight in there?
Of course. So I think that they are really signaling a lot in the way that they phrase this, right? And what people should know when they apply to the University of Chicago is it's not just another highly selective school. It is very much its own organism.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is what they're trying to signal to the applicant is that don't just throw out an app to us. Like you really want to be thinking about, is this the kind of environment in which you will flourish, be happy, and be successful?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I think they're really trying to dig at is sort of like a culture fit. Um, Now, you and I know, having a long time history with the university, that it is different than it was, than when you worked there
Mm-hmm.
and as I've, lived around it and seen it evolve. But it still is very much its own unique spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they're looking for an understanding of what makes that place tick
Mm-hmm.
and how you're going to really feel like you're a part of the community and will take advantage of their very specific and unique resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was there, and again, I think things have changed. There's a new
Yeah,
dean, but I have to imagine that the school really still values a really intellectual student,
for
right?
sure.
U Chicago is not the kind of place where people go in great numbers to the football games or anything like that. It's really very much about the life of the mind. They are not BSing when they put that on their like postcards and whatnot that they send out. So they really want students to signal that interest, that they want an intellectual environment, not
For
just
sure.
another good school. Like a lot of students kind of go, well, it's a good school, so I'll apply. And I'm like, no,
Yes.
you need to think about this more carefully.
Absolutely, because people are it's not to say that it's better or worse, harder or not than
Mm-hmm.
other schools that have a similar level of selectivity, but the vibe of the place, like I'm a Northwestern grad, right? It's like 8 miles away. They are different universes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they are looking for people who are really invested in rigorous intellectual engagement, sparring partners, conversation,
Mm-hmm.
deep dives, lots of maybe extracurricular, but even more so co-curricular opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So that is really what they're trying to help students understand.
Mm-hmm. I also recommend that students look at the core. Very few schools have the core. Columbia does as well. Reed does. St. John's. There are other schools, but Chicago is justifiably extremely proud of its core. And if you don't like the core, I think they kind of think, at least when we were there, we sort of thought, if you don't like the core, you probably won't like Chicago either. So kind
I
of really
agree.
take in their curriculum and what's different about it. And if it appeals to you, write that. And, please note, they even say, please address with some specificity your own wishes and how they relate to that. So why do you think a school with a core is a good thing, even?
Absolutely. And I see a lot of, I should say I talk down a lot of my students from talking about the campus and the amount of Nobel Prize winners because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
both of those things are true. However, both of those things are not what is going to keep you there, right?
Right.
Having a clear understanding of what the expectation is around your academic future while you're a student is really critical. And I agree. For some reason, the core doesn't translate as well as like people's understanding of the core at like a St. John's or a Columbia or something. I think
Mhm.
they just kind of almost forget about it. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know how it gets kind of lost in the shuffle, but
Mhm.
I do think that if the core really appeals for you and you like that kind of direction and you're interested in that kind of inquiry, students should absolutely really talk about that.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And yeah, call up and ask questions too. I mean, they've got students who will talk to you about your experience with it if you're trying to kind of grapple with it. But I think it's going to be worth your time to try and understand more about it for sure.
absolutely. And I think that the student body is really fine with what goes on there. Like they're all
Oh,
in.
oh
You know what
yeah.
I mean? Yeah, like they're not a lot of naysayers there about like people misunderstanding what the deal is. I think people are there, they're happy, they feel like they're amongst their crowd,
Hmm.
and they get a lot of satisfaction out of this kind of intellectual rigor.
For sure. Yeah, it was very similar to read for me in that way, where when I came to read, I was like, here are my people. I have I
Right,
have found my nerd brethren,
right.
like
Yeah,
so acknowledging that, like talking about how this is you. You are one of them,
totally.
like is
Totally.
I think is really, really helpful.
Yeah,
Um,
because there are a lot of schools where there's a lot for a lot of people to love, right?
mhm,
There's a lot to love here, but it's a niche crowd.
mhm,
And so, you can't like round hole square peg it there. You will be unhappy.
mhm,
So, this idea, you should feel like, oh, I have found my people. This
mhm.
is where I belong. People should have that kind of response to University of Chicago for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not University of Illinois
No.
Urbana-Champaign, which is a great school. It's huge. You can
Yeah.
find your crowd there. At
Yes.
Chicago, it is a niche crowd. It's a particular group. There
Absolutely.
is
Yeah.
more diversity within that than people might realize, but overall, the intellectualism, the kind of general nerdiness, like that is the vibe. And you either have to be one of them or you have to be very comfortable with that and
Yeah.
kind of
I
have
would
fun
agree.
with it, I would say.
Sure. And Sally, I not to browbeat this because I know we have to move on, but would you also say it's kind of not for shrinking violets either because I think um an enriching and satisfying academic experience means that you are willing to fully participate in
Mm-hmm.
class, in study groups, like all of that stuff. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's not for people who are sort of waiting for it to come to them, but are see that it's there and are willing to engage.
I would completely agree. I think students, it's okay if you're reserved and even if you're
Yes,
shy, as long as you're willing to speak up in class. This is not a place to be passive in a classroom.
right.
And people will argue with you. I mean, if you're somebody who's not comfortable with that, I mean, I picked up on that right away when I was there and I really enjoyed it, right? But Chicago even puts it out there like people get to say stuff here. We're not, nobody's going to get canceled. Like and I'm not going to get into all the politics. I think some things we
Yeah,
shouldn't say, I'll be honest, but
sure.
Chicago is very kind of clear about freedom of speech. And what I think they're trying to do, where I think the positive side of that is that we get to discuss ideas and we get to disagree with each other. And there will be disagreements. And that is actually a valuable form of discourse.
Yeah, it's healthy. It's very
Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. So hopefully that was helpful. So now let's dig in to the quirky essays.
Yes.
And I do love these. I think they're very hard for students to write, but I will say that when I worked at Chicago, when a student really tried to grapple with one of these in a pretty like kind of went all in, even if we didn't feel that the essay fully worked, we gave them credit for it. So I want to sort of give students reassurance that taking a risk and really trying to grapple with one of these questions and have fun with it and do something different is not going to tank your application as long as
I
like
agree.
it absolutely like yeah, it's very hard to do this kind of writing for most students, but if you give it your best shot and you're really brave about it, I think that's going to be understood and rewarded even if the writing doesn't end up quite coming off.
Sure. I agree 100%. This was not, I could not have managed this when I was applying as a high school student, which is why it was not the place for me. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that sort of freedom to just sort of like not worry so much about, oh my gosh, what about this? But I was like thinking, I think a little too much in a box. And
Mhm.
this is the kind of place where we really want people to bust out of that and to have fun with esoteric topics. Do a deep dive on your favorite Marvel character.
Mhm.
As long as you can come up with an interesting question around it. Do a deep, dive on how much you love matcha tea, or the
Mhm.
fact that you don't understand smooth peanut butter. Like, I don't care what it is, but it should be something that, as Sally said, like you put a valiant effort into it, and
Mhm.
you gave it your best shot, and kind of like you weren't worried about what the other person thought. You're like, this
Mhm.
is how I'm feeling about it. This is what I want to expound on, or this is the question I want to explore. I think
Mhm.
that's really fun. And I've seen some really cool things come out of it, even when my students don't crush it.
Mhm.
But I recognize the growth that they've made and how they push themselves. I think that's something to be applauded.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I will say that, I mean, for obvious reasons, I get a lot of students applying to University of Chicago, and
Right.
I will, and this is again also from working there. I will say that most of them don't fully work, but if they can get to that certain point where like, as a reader, I can tell the bravery and that they push themselves. I'm like, you know what, this is this is good. This is still going to be a point in your column. And then if it really fully works, which is so rare,
So
holy
rare.
cow. I'm like, if they don't admit you, they're stupid because you're
Yeah.
obviously perfect.
Yeah.
Like I will say that the best essays are both creative, but still somehow manage to really communicate something about the student, right? Like I
Absolutely.
think that's sort of the golden standard of it, where you haven't just kind of like told a random short story, which again,
Yep.
like if you go for it, that, I mean, points for that, right? If you try hard, but
Sure.
the best ones are where it does say something about the student, even if it's just about their curiosity and how they would engage in whatever particular situation there might be,
Yeah.
I had a student who, I can't even remember the prompt anymore, but he basically wrote about how a particular writing had like turned him into an atheist, and then from that into a Muslim, and it was like this whole intellectual journey took
Whoa.
place through words. I mean, this student was a perfect Chicago student, and you know what, he was admitted, and I would have been really appalled if he hadn't been. So kind of like in these sort of journeys, in these, like all of these essays, I feel like can allow a student to kind of explain a particular intellectual journey that they might be going on. Like, what's so easy about pie? Like where do you start with pie? Like, how many different places can pie take you? Is it the
Right.
manufacturing of it? Like, what is
Right.
it
Is it the
that
taste
could be
testing of it? Is
easy?
it the chemical process of baking the perfect crust? Like, to your point,
Mm-hmm.
what is it and how do you want to explore that?
Right.
Um, I also find that this is where my students don't have to worry so much about providing a lot of backstory about a topic.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if they are very much into particle physics and they want to do a deep dive on something, or the Fibonacci sequence or whatever, this is the place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little harder to do that at other places, not because they can't handle it, but that's just not as welcomed here. Where, as you said, if you have a real intellectual curiosity that's taking you down a deep, deep rabbit hole, talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely
Mm-hmm.
talk about it. So for me, that has meant students that have really talked deep about a love of music or a particular like chord sequence in something, or I mean things that I'm like, yeah, you couldn't say that at XYZ other school, but here is exactly where this belongs.
Exactly. And do connect it to yourself. But yeah, as you said, they
Sure.
don't need the background. Remember, they have your Common Up essay, they have
Yep.
your Why Chicago essays. Those are going to be much more straightforward. They've got the whole rest of your application. So in this one, you can really take it on kind of a flight of fancy, like you're Alice in the looking glass. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
have a good time with it, but as much as possible, like somehow connect it to you, somehow let the reader know why this was interesting to you, why you picked up, I mean, I've seen a student take the What About Pie essay and turn it into a whole like history of the world, right? Like in kind of like this really funny way. Like there's just so many different potential options of how you could
What a
do that.
talent. Like I couldn't do that. I think
Mhm.
I've turned into a pretty good writer, but what a talent to be able to do that. And what I will say is I know we're talking about this, like what's easy about pie, but I want people to remember there's so many choices.
Mhm.
So if you read them, and listen, I'll be honest, some of them at first glance, I'm like, I don't even know that I fully get what that means.
Right.
So some of them, if they just don't resonate, move on. They just don't resonate. And you can
Yeah.
also come up with your own. So I don't want people, if it really is a fit, but the supplement is the deterrent, keep at it. Eventually something will come. And to your point, Sally, this idea about it always needs to connect back to you, always. It really
Mhm.
does. And we want to see a journey, we want to see self actualization or reflection. Like those are all themes that we still want to be able to see in whatever you choose to write about here.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kira. That was
You're
great.
so welcome. Thanks for having me, Sally. Take
Uh,
care.
Absolutely. All right. And thanks so much to Chrissy and Ryan. Get ready for our show next week. Our regular host, Beth Heaton, will be answering listener questions. And finally, I want to remind you that you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. And you can also download every show for free on iTunes. And if you want to search for a particular show topic, you can go to our blog page at blog.getintocollege.com. We do have some pretty great shows in our archives. One of the ones I like to highlight is our interview with Jeff Salengo and actually our whole discussion of his book, Getting In. And last, don't forget, we're here every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.